Today we're talking about graphs in chapter 5, and you're going to look at the whole chapter to see what kind of graph you want to create next week. But first you have to have an understanding. So you do need to take some notes during this video. You have to decide which type of graph you're going to use, and it depends on the information that you're going to research. There's several different types of graphs. You have line graphs, which are used to show trends over intervals of time. So you take some information and you plot it, and it's a line graph, like temperature changes over the year, the average temperature every month through the course of a year. Gas prices for every sets of 10 intervals of years, the average gas price and how going back to the 60s and how that might have increased per gallon. You have bar graphs. Bar graphs are also many different categories of bar graphs. The ones that are on the Excel program that we're going to be using, bar graphs are shown as going from the left to the right. Columns are also bar graphs and they go up and down, but we think of bar graphs as both so that you don't get confused with that. But when you go into the Excel program, it differentiates between bar graphs or columns, that type of thing. But they're used when the data, that's the information you're collecting, fall in distinct categories that you want to compare the totals. So for instance, if you're looking at the Pistons, at their win-loss record for 1975, 1985, 1995, 2005, and you'll have two bars, wins and losses for each of those years, and then you do a comparison of over those decades from 1975 or 1965 until 2005, or you might even show 2005 if you go in increments and then show last year's record of 2011. And then you do a comparison. That's an idea of type of information you would want to graph. A histogram is unique, and I want you to look in the book for that, in the section. You're going to look for histograms in your book in chapter 5. And that shows you, it's a bar graph, but it's unique. Instead of doing just a X and Y axis, where you have like by 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 on the X axis and the same thing on the Y axis, it actually groups the information. You might want to use that when you're collecting data on a survey and you have different ranges of numbers. In the book it gives you like taxes on gasoline is one, where you're doing all 50 states and you want to see the tax on a gallon of gas for each state, because that varies across the country. And instead of graphing 50 different taxes, like 50 cents or $1.22 for every state, you group them. So you graph the information, so you'd say, 1 cent to 25 cents, and then the next one would be 26 cents to 50 cents. But you got to be careful, because if some taxes are $3, then you're going to have a long histogram. And to understand that, you need to look in your book at that. A pictograph is also a bar graph, but instead of using bars, you actually use pictures to show the height of something. If you have like the amount of meat consumption in the U.S. and chicken consumption, do people eat more meat or more chicken? And you have pounds consumed in a year. You can actually look that information up. And you go back to 1965, 1975, and 1985, and you show the amount of beef and chicken consumption for each of those years in a decade, every 10 years. And you, instead of putting the bars up next to each other, you would put pictures of cows, little cows that stack on top of each other, and stacks of chickens. Something to think about. It's a little bit more difficult. Then the other thing that we're going to talk about is I want you to look in your books right now, pause the video, and look in your books, pre-algebra on page 226, and math, my math class is on page 248. Look over the section, the first 2 pages of reading, and then look at the exercises, the homework. You're not doing those projects, you're looking at them. and then come back. This is all about misleading graphs. So pause the video, look at those pages, and then come back. All right, let's see if you understood it. Misleading graph does what? Okay, it's a good idea. What it does is it tries to get you to think something else. So for instance, when you look at it, it's the way it's used a lot in advertising and promotion, or somebody's trying to sell you something. You always are careful about the graphs. This is a misleading graph because unless you look at the numbers, it looks like in February this almost doubled in whatever this is about. Let's just say it was my sales, and this represents 32 million, and this is 35 million. But it looks like, based on this graph, that this from here to here doubled. So you would expect this to be a much better month than it really was. And the reason why they do that is they start the graph at 29. So instead of having 0 here, they put 29 on the base, okay? Otherwise, if they put 0 and they counted legitimately by tens, then you would see the breakdown and it'd be a little bit more closely related. But this is a misleading graph because it makes you feel like February they made a lot of money. Why is that important? Because if you're investing in a company and you see, and it's December and you think they have high sales in February, you might invest, buy stocks in that company, expecting to have a huge profit and maybe a bump in the stocks in February, and that might not be the case. So you have to be careful. A lot of times, let's see if I can bring this down. I'll step over in front. Let me see if I can get this down. There we go. Here we go. Here's one with bowling averages. At first look again. The axis starts at 110, not 0. And it makes it look like Emily is far better than Diana and Hildy, doesn't it? It makes her look like she's got a much better bowling average. When in actuality, if you look at the shape of this, she's only about a little over 10 pence higher than Diana. And this looks like it's 3 times as much as Hildy, but Hildy's almost at 115, and this would imply that Emily is 3 times better than Hildy's average, but she's not, because this is at just about 115. Now she is a better bowler, but not that much better. So do you see how that works? Okay, so let's see if I can get this. And then this one, ticket prices. If you look at this, it makes it look like in 2001, the prices are exorbitant. I mean, it's just so expensive to go to a basketball game as opposed to 1991. But now come over here and look at this. In 1991, it was $22, $22 a game. And now it's $51. That's $30 more. Yeah, that's a big price increase, but this basketball makes it, how many basketballs could you get in here? That's what you have to look at. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it looks like it's 6 times more, which would say it was about 120 something. It's only about 50. So this is misleading not because of the axis, but because of the shape. They still went up to the right price, but they drew this basketball enormously. And that's a pictograph. Same thing here. It looks like that this is, how many of these baseballs can you get in here? This smaller one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this looks like it's 5 times more expensive. It was about $8 or $9. It's $20 now, or $20 in 2001. Those are misleading graphs because it makes you think, oh my gosh, it's so expensive to go. Yeah, it's expensive, but not to the degree it's representing. Now, what usually happens if it's not a pictograph, in here, when they do start at 0, you have to be careful. Sometimes they start at 0, and the examples they gave you in the book, they start at 0, and then they start counting, and then they put this break in the axis. It's called a break. Break in the axis. And the axis then jumps to doing 1, 2, 3, 4. So it might count 5, 10, 20, 30, and then have a break, and then count by ones. That is misleading. So you have to be careful with those graphs, so you have to check them out. So now I'm going to show you some different ideas for graphs. When you do your Excel project, and you'll get all this information on how to do this, but on Monday, after you do an exercise, starting next week, after you do an exercise with Mrs. Noren and finding out how to use the library and research for this material, then you have to find your information. And here's some ideas. So your graphs. This is a bar graph, and what he did was he did passer rating ranks. So he looked up different passers and he gave the rankings. The problem was he did an overall, he didn't say who they were. So that's a little bit confusing, isn't it? So that's an idea. Let's do this one. This one was the change of Marine Corps strength over time. And he went back to 1990 and he showed the number of people in the Marine Corps and how it's going down and somewhat leveled out. And so then you decide, why did it drop so drastically from 1990 to 1995? What was happening in our country? Wasn't we lost all those casualties, was it? Did we lose people in the war? Or did we have a low people stopping? Why did they stop enrolling into the Marine Corps? So this is what you're going to create. This is different kinds of ideas of stuff you can research. This one is the population of Detroit, New York City, and Los Angeles. It's a bar graph. Each one represents 1990, 2000, 2008, and it shows Detroit over those 3 years, Los Angeles, and New York, and how it's climbed in different areas. These, again, are ideas of what to graph, make graphs of. Wide receivers. These are the wide receivers and the number of receptions and touchdowns they had. Receptions being the blue and the red being the number of touchdowns. And it's got the top receivers, Calvin Johnson, and it doesn't say the year. So that's something you need to know. That's something you would want to correct on yours. This is a crime graph. Violent and property crimes and how it's changed. It really has been pretty stable over the years, but it doesn't say, wait, this is national numbers, or is it one city? Is it a couple of cities? And then you have an Olympics, Olympic swimming records in the different countries. It's hard for you to see, but this has the names of the countries down here and shows how many medals or how many world records or Olympic swimming records these countries have. So when you're creating these things, let's see, do I have one that's the stock chart? Here's a stock that's a line graph that shows different stocks and their values over a couple of weeks. He tracked them for 2 weeks to see how their prices went and how stable they were, and that's a line graph. These are things for you to think about over the weekend, types of what you want to research on Monday. Get an idea of what you want to do, because Monday after you do the project on Monday afternoon and Tuesday, you have to come up with what you're going to make a graph about. And it's got to be information that's related. You can use a line graph or a bar graph. Look over chapter 5. Just the relevant stuff on line graphs, bar graphs, histograms, pictographs, and misleading graphs. Get a sense of that over the weekend and figure out some ideas. Talk to your parents about something that would be fun to look up so that you can create a graph next week. You'll be watching Excel video on Monday night, getting you ready to start to do the project in school on Tuesday. But you need to start thinking about what you want to graph. So, have a good day, and I'll see you later.